The vastness of space holds infinite possibilities, but some possibilities were never meant to converge. The United Federation of Planets had encountered anomalies that defied physics, entities that transcended understanding, and mysteries that challenged the very foundations of reality. Yet nothing in Starfleet's exhaustive records could have prepared them for what was about to emerge from the bleeding wound in space-time itself. The USS Enterprise D, flagship of the Federation, maintained standard orbit around the Tyrelius Nebula, conducting routine stellar cartography. On the bridge, Captain Jean-Luc Picard reviewed geological survey reports with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had found peace in exploration. The hum of the warp core resonated through the deck plating, a comforting reminder of humanity's journey to the stars. Then reality screamed. "Captain!" Lieutenant Worf's voice cut through the bridge's serenity. Sensors detecting massive subspace distortion, bearing 27 Mark III. Energy signatures are... He paused, his Klingon features twisting in confusion. They do not correspond to any known phenomenon. Picard rose from his command chair, tugging his uniform straight in that characteristic gesture. On screen, the view screen shifted, and the bridge crew collectively caught their breath. Space itself was tearing open, but this was no ordinary rift. Subspace fractured like shattered glass, and through the cracks bled colors that had no name, energies that made the ship's sensors shriek in protest. Data's fingers flew across his console with android precision. "Captain, the anomaly is not merely subspace displacement," Data reported, his yellow eyes reflecting the impossible light streaming from the rift. "It appears to be a convergence point between our dimensional space and something fundamentally different. The energy readings suggest another layer of reality entirely, one that operates on principles incompatible with our physical laws." "Counselor," Picard glanced at Deanna Troi, whose empathic abilities often provided crucial insight. Troy's face had gone pale, one hand pressed against her temple. "Captain, I'm sensing presence, something vast and ancient beyond measure. It's not malevolent, but the sheer weight of it..." She gasped, steadying herself against her chair. "It's like standing before an ocean of consciousness, and it's aware of us." Commander Riker moved to Picard's side, his expression grim. "Recommendations, Captain?" Before Picard could respond, the rift expanded violently. The Enterprise shuddered as gravitational forces twisted local space-time. Alarms wailed across the bridge. "Shields up! Red alert!" Picard commanded. "Back us off, Ensign. Full impulse." "I'm trying, sir." The con officer struggled with her controls. "The gravitational distortion. We're being pulled toward the anomaly." Then, through the rift, something emerged. It was a figure, humanoid, yet transcending that simple description. Tall beyond normal human proportions, clad in golden armor that seemed to drink in the light of nearby stars, while simultaneously radiating its own illumination. The being's presence registered on every sensor simultaneously, as matter, as energy, as something that existed in multiple states at once. The face, if it could be called merely a face, bore features that were undeniably human, yet perfected beyond mortal achievement, ancient beyond calculation, and terrible in its focused intelligence. The moment the figure fully materialized in open space, surviving without suit or ship, every human on the Enterprise felt it. A psychic pressure, immense and undeniable, pressed against their minds. Not invasive, not hostile, but simply present, like standing in the shadow of a mountain and feeling its mass. "By the Klingon gods," Worf whispered, his warrior's instinct recognizing something primal. Data's console erupted with data. "Captain, the entity is generating its own protective field, not technological, but some form of directed energy manipulation. It is also projecting what appears to be psychic energy on a scale that exceeds anything in Federation records, including documented Betazoid or Vulcan capabilities by several orders of magnitude. The figure turned its gaze toward the Enterprise, and Picard felt the full weight of that attention. For one eternal moment, he stood not on his bridge but somewhere else, a throne room of unimaginable scale, built for wars that consumed galaxies, surrounded by warriors whose genetic perfection made them demigods, facing threats that made the Borg seem like children with tools they didn't understand. He saw humanity's potential stretch to its absolute limit, and beyond that limit, horrors that waited in the spaces between thought and madness. Then he was back on his bridge, gasping, "Captain!" Riker caught Picard's arm as he steadied himself. The figure raised one armored hand, and every system on the Enterprise registered the same transmission, not through communications arrays, but directly into the minds of every crew member aboard. The voice, when it came, resonated in their thoughts with the weight of absolute authority, tempered by exhaustion older than civilizations. "I am the Emperor of mankind. I have shepherded humanity through the crucible of old night, built an imperium spanning 1,000,000 worlds, and held back the darkness that would consume all thought and light. I find myself in a reality not my own, among humans who have achieved what I dared only dream. Peace among the stars. Tell me, Captain of this vessel, in your Federation, has humanity forgotten what true darkness looks like, or have you simply been fortunate enough never to face it?" Picard straightened, drawing on every ounce of diplomatic training and personal conviction. This being radiated power that could crush the Enterprise like paper, yet it had opened with a question, not a demand. That meant something. "I am Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Federation Starship Enterprise. We are explorers and diplomats, committed to peaceful coexistence and the betterment of all sentient species." He met that terrible gaze without flinching. "And I believe that humanity's greatest strength has always been hope, not fear of darkness." Across the impossible distance of open space, the Emperor's expression shifted. Something that might have been a smile or might have been the memory of one. "Then we have much to discuss, Captain, and I suspect this universe is about to test that hope far more severely than you know." The transporter room materialized the impossible. Chief O'Brien's hands moved across his controls with practiced expertise, yet his readings made no sense. The figure resolving on the pad registered as matter, pure energy, and something his sensors insisted couldn't exist, all simultaneously. When the Emperor of mankind fully manifested aboard the Enterprise, the entire ship felt it. Lights flickered. The warp core's harmonic hum shifted pitch momentarily. Every empath and telepath aboard, from Counselor Troy to visiting Betazoid delegates, felt that vast psychic presence condense into physical space. The Emperor stood 3 meters tall in his golden artificer armor, each plate inscribed with geometric patterns that seemed to shift when observed peripherally. Yet it was his face that captured attention, ageless, neither young nor old, bearing the weight of experiences that spanned millennia. His eyes held depths that suggested he had watched civilizations rise, flourish, and fall to ash countless times. Picard stood flanked by Riker and Worf, phaser conspicuously absent from his hip. A deliberate choice. If this being meant harm, handheld weapons would prove as useful as harsh language. Behind them, Data observed with scientific fascination, while Troy remained pale but composed. "Welcome aboard the Enterprise," Picard began, falling back on first contact protocols that suddenly seemed absurdly inadequate. "You've claimed to be humanity's guardian from another reality. I confess, we have many questions." The Emperor stepped down from the transporter pad, and despite his immense size, the movement carried preternatural grace. When he spoke aloud, His voice resonated with harmonics that suggested multiple pitches layered impossibly together. As do I, Captain. Your Federation represents an outcome I never achieved. Humans living freely, exploring peacefully, allied with Xeno species as equals. He paused, studying each officer. In my reality, such idealism died in the fires of the Age of Strife. Humanity's first stellar empire fell to darkness, alien predation, and the birth of new gods that fed on thought itself. What emerged required harsher measures. Your Imperium, Picard said carefully. You rule humanity through authoritarian control. I rule humanity because the alternative was extinction. The Emperor's response carried no defensiveness, only statement of fact. I have fought wars you cannot imagine against enemies that would make your nightmares seem pleasant. I have made choices that damned my own soul to save the species that created me. I am tyrant, war master, and genocidal conqueror, and every human alive in my reality exists because of those sins. The blunt honesty silenced the room. Worf's hand didn't move toward his phaser, but his posture shifted into something more respectful. Warriors recognized warriors, even when philosophies clashed. Riker spoke up, his diplomatic training kicking in. You said you found yourself here. This wasn't intentional? The rift between our realities was not of my making, though I sensed its opening. The Emperor turned his attention to Data, studying the android with obvious interest. Fascinating. An artificial intelligence granted full personhood and Starfleet rank. In my Imperium, all thinking machines were destroyed 15,000 years ago after they betrayed humanity during our darkest hour. Yet, here stands proof that such coexistence remains possible under proper conditions. Data tilted his head. I am curious about your dimensional transition, Emperor. Our sensors detected energy signatures incompatible with known physics. Commander LaForge described the readings as warp energy, the Emperor interrupted, though not the warp drive of your technology. In my reality, there exists a dimension parallel to real space, the immaterium, or simply the warp. It is the realm of thought, emotion, and psychic power made manifest. It is also home to entities of such malevolence that to speak their names invites corruption. He glanced at Troy, who shuddered. Your counselor's empathic abilities would make her exceptionally vulnerable in my universe. The warp does not merely reflect emotion. It feeds on it, twists it, and sends it back as predation. And you draw power from this warp? Picard asked. I am the anathema to the warp's darker aspects, a being of pure psychic might who has held back its horrors for 10,000 years. But here, in your reality, the warp does not exist. Your subspace operates on different principles. My abilities function, but they must adapt. The Emperor raised one gauntleted hand, and golden light flickered around his fingers, psychic power made visible. The light wavered, stabilized, then burned brighter. I am learning your universe's rules. It will not take long. 10,000 years, Riker repeated. You've lived that long? 48,000 years. Commander, I walked ancient Terra when your ancestors were first learning to shape bronze. I guided humanity's evolution from the shadows, orchestrated the development of civilization, and when necessary, waged war to ensure our survival. I am perpetual, immortal unless slain by sufficient force, and I have been slain more than once, only to regenerate given time and will. The casual revelation of his age stunned them into momentary silence. Even Data's positronic matrix required a moment to process the implications. Picard recovered first, his archaeological interests momentarily overwhelming diplomatic caution. Then you've witnessed humanity's entire history. You've seen us at our worst and our best. I have seen humans achieve transcendent nobility and descend into depravity that would break your mind to comprehend. The Emperor's expression softened slightly, the first display of something approaching warmth. But I have also seen them endure when all hope seemed lost. That is why I continue fighting, Captain. Not because I enjoy tyranny, but because humanity, at its core, possesses potential worth any sacrifice to preserve. Even sacrificing freedom itself? Picard challenged gently. I enslaved billions to save trillions. I committed xenocide against species that threatened humanity's existence. I built an imperium where thought itself is controlled because unchecked thought in my reality literally spawns demons. The Emperor met Picard's gaze with absolute honesty. Your Federation exists because this universe is kinder than mine. You've never faced true chaos. Pray you never do. Before Picard could respond, the intercom chirped. Bridge to Captain Picard. It was Geordi LaForge's voice, tight with urgency. Sir, we're detecting another subspace anomaly. This one's different. It's a Borg signature. Long-range sensors show a cube changing course, heading straight for us. The Emperor's expression hardened into something Picard recognized from his own nightmares, the face of a warrior who had seen this enemy before, in different form but same essence. Captain, the Emperor said quietly, it seems your universe is less kind than you believe. What approaches is precisely the darkness I spoke of, merely wearing different skin. The observation lounge had witnessed countless strategic conferences, but none quite like this. Picard sat at the head of the table with his senior staff arranged in their customary positions. The Emperor stood at the viewport, a towering golden figure silhouetted against the stars, radiating an aura that made the spacious room feel confining. Borg cube, bearing 237 Mark V, distance 12 light-years and closing at warp 7.2. Data reported, his fingers steepled in characteristic fashion. At current speed, intercept in approximately 42 hours. They altered course the moment you arrived, Riker observed, studying the Emperor's armored back. That's not typical Borg behavior. They're usually more methodical, more predetermined in their approach vectors. The Emperor turned from the viewport, and his expression carried grim recognition. The collective sensed something unprecedented, a psychic and technological signature, unlike anything in their vast database of assimilated knowledge. They are coming to add my distinctiveness to their own. You're familiar with the Borg? Picard's tone sharpened. The Borg were his nightmare, the threat that had violated his very identity at Wolf 359, turning him into Locutus and forcing him to participate in the slaughter of his own fleet. Not the Borg specifically, but their fundamental nature, yes. The Emperor moved to the table, his presence seeming to compress the space. He didn't sit. The chairs couldn't accommodate his size, but he leaned forward, armored gauntlets resting on the table's surface. In my reality, I have fought enemies called the Necrons, a race of soulless machines that converted themselves from flesh to immortal metal bodies, enslaved to dynasties of mad god kings, and more relevantly, I have combated the concept itself, the dissolution of individual consciousness into collective existence, whether through psychic corruption or technological assimilation. The Borg are unlike any enemy you've faced, Worf stated firmly, his Klingon pride bristling at the implied comparison. They adapt to any defense. They assimilate entire civilizations. A single cube destroyed 39 Federation starships at Wolf 359. Because they function as one consciousness operating countless bodies. The Emperor nodded, granting them instantaneous tactical adaptation, shared technological innovation, and the accumulated knowledge of thousands of assimilated species. They represent the antithesis of individuality, converting diversity into uniformity through force. His eyes fixed on Picard with unsettling intensity. And they have already touched you, Captain. I can sense the residual psychic scarring. They violated your mind, used you as their voice. The table fell silent. Troy glanced at Picard with concern while Riker's jaw tightened. It wasn't classified information. The crew knew about Locutus, but having this stranger perceive Picard's deepest trauma with casual observation felt invasive. Picard met the Emperor's gaze without flinching. The Borg assimilated me at Wolf 359. I became Locutus of Borg, their spokesperson. My crew rescued me, but the experience... He paused, choosing words carefully. It taught me that some enemies cannot be reasoned with, only survived. Yet you survived with your individuality intact, the Emperor observed. Remarkable. The strength required to reclaim one's consciousness from collective dissolution speaks to exceptional will. Had you lived in my Imperium, Captain, you would make a worthy space marine, perhaps even a Primarch. I'd prefer not to live in your Imperium, Picard replied evenly. From what you've described, it's a fascist theocracy built on conquest and oppression. It is, the Emperor agreed without hesitation. It is also the only reason humanity in my reality still exists. Your moral luxury derives from circumstances that never required you to make impossible choices, Captain. But the Borg will test that luxury soon enough. Beverly Crusher leaned forward, her medical curiosity overcoming diplomatic tension. You mentioned adapting to our universe's physics. Are your abilities affected? My psychic capabilities draw from the warp, a dimension that doesn't exist here. Your subspace serves similar functions but operates under different laws. The Emperor raised his hand, and golden light coalesced around his fingers, forming intricate geometric patterns that hurt to observe directly. I am learning to channel power through subspace rather than the immaterium. The transition is instructive. Your universe is surprisingly resilient to psychic manipulation, which explains why your telepaths operate at such limited capacity compared to psychers in my reality. Limited? Troy asked, a hint of defensiveness creeping into her voice. Counselor, your empathic abilities are remarkable by local standards. But in my Imperium, a sanctioned psyker of moderate strength could read surface thoughts across a star system, project killing force with their mind, or literally tear holes in reality through concentration. The Emperor's tone wasn't condescending, merely factual. That such power exists in my universe and not yours is to your benefit. The warp grants immense capability at terrible cost. Every psyker in my service risks demonic possession if their concentration wavers. Demons? Data's head tilted. Metaphorical or literal entities? Literal. The warp is inhabited by predatory consciousnesses that feed on emotion and thought. They offer power, knowledge, and transformation, always at prices that doom the recipient. I have spent 20,000 years fighting the Chaos Gods themselves, entities of such magnitude that entire sectors of space have been consumed by their influence. The Emperor's voice carried the weight of exhausted eternity. The Borg are terrible, Captain, but they are comprehensible. They assimilate matter and consciousness, but remain bound by physical laws. Chaos corrupts reality itself, turning planets inside out, reversing causality, transforming thoughts into malevolent beings. Between the two, I would choose to face the Borg. Geordie LaForge, who had been studying his Piad, spoke up. With all due respect, Emperor, the Borg have assimilated hundreds of species. They've adapted to every weapon, every defense we've developed. Our best victories against them have been narrow escapes, not decisive defeats. Then you've been fighting them incorrectly. The Emperor straightened to his full imposing height. The Borg's greatest strength is also their critical vulnerability. Their collective consciousness allows perfect coordination, but it also means a single point of failure. Disrupt their hive connection, and thousands of drones become confused automatons. Strike at the Queen, their nexus consciousness, and you decapitate their entire command structure. "We know about the Queen," Riker interjected. "Captain Picard encountered her in the past. She's adaptive, intelligent, and individual enough to coordinate the collective while being distributed enough to survive destruction of any single body. Then you face a tactical puzzle: how to permanently disrupt a distributed consciousness that can regenerate itself." The Emperor began pacing, his strategic mind visibly engaged. "In my reality, I would deploy psychic warfare, casting the Queen's consciousness into the warp, where demons would tear her patterns apart before she could reconstitute. Here, without the warp, alternative methods are required." "We're not interested in methods that require genocide or mass destruction," Picard stated firmly. "The Federation doesn't wage wars of extermination." The Emperor turned, and for a moment, something like pity crossed his ancient features. "Captain, the Borg wage wars of extermination by their very nature. Every being they assimilate is murdered, their consciousness subsumed, their individuality destroyed, their body converted into a component of the machine. Your moral stance is admirable, but warfare has one rule: survival. You can extend mercy after victory, but mercy during combat against an enemy like the Borg is suicide. We've survived encounters with them before," Picard countered. "You've retreated from encounters with them before," the Emperor corrected. "There's a difference between survival and victory, Captain, and eventually, retreat becomes impossible." The tension in the room crystallized around that fundamental disagreement: the Federation's hopeful determination to find better ways versus the Emperor's exhausted pragmatism born from millennia of wars where mercy meant extinction. Data broke the silence with his characteristic analytical approach. Philosophically, the debate between idealism and pragmatism in warfare is ancient. However, the immediate tactical situation requires practical decisions. Emperor, you claim familiarity with collective consciousness entities. Would you be willing to share tactical recommendations? The Emperor studied Data for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I will share knowledge, android. Whether your captain chooses to use it remains his prerogative. But I warn you all, this cube has altered its course specifically to investigate my presence. The Borg have sensed something they have never encountered before. They will be coming with far more determination than your previous encounters." "Then we'd better prepare," Riker said, standing. "Captain?" Picard rose as well, his command decision made. "We'll hear the Emperor's tactical recommendations, but this crew and this ship operate according to Federation principles. We'll face the Borg as we always have, with courage, ingenuity, and hope that there's a better way than mutual annihilation." The Emperor's expression remained unreadable, but his voice carried something that might have been respect or might have been sorrow. "Then I will help you, Captain Picard, and we shall see whether hope or experience proves more valuable when the Borg arrive. In my experience, the universe rewards preparation over optimism, but I have been wrong before, once or twice across 48 millennia." The ghost of dark humor in that statement didn't escape anyone. 48,000 years of being wrong once or twice suggested a being whose judgment, however harsh, derived from hard-won wisdom. As the senior staff dispersed to their duties, Picard remained for a moment with the Emperor, staring together at the stars beyond the viewport. "You think we're naive?" Picard said quietly. "I think you're fortunate," the Emperor replied. "And I genuinely hope your fortune continues, Captain. Because if your Federation ever faces the full darkness that consumed my galaxy, you will understand why I became what I am, and that understanding would break something beautiful in this reality." Neither spoke again, but the weight of coming confrontation hung heavy in the air between them. Two visions of humanity's future about to be tested against the inexorable advance of the Borg. 30 hours had passed since the Emperor's arrival, and the Enterprise had transformed into a fortress preparing for siege. Deck by deck, system by system, the crew implemented modifications that pushed their technology to unprecedented limits, guided by knowledge that predated their civilization by 40,000 years. In engineering, Geordi LaForge stood before the warp core with the Emperor, who studied the pulsing matter-antimatter reaction chamber with the critical eye of someone who had witnessed the birth and death of countless technologies. "Elegant," the Emperor observed, his voice modulated to avoid overwhelming the acoustics of the confined space. "Your warp drive functions by creating subspace distortion fields rather than tearing through dimensional barriers. Safer than my Imperium's warp drives, though considerably slower." "A fair trade." Geordi adjusted his visor, the neural interface processing the Emperor's energy signature as bands of golden light that shouldn't exist according to known physics. "Your Imperium travels through this warp dimension? That sounds incredibly dangerous." "It is. Ships traversing the warp require psychic shields called Geller fields to prevent demonic incursion. Without such protection, crews go mad, possessed, or worse. Yet it remains necessary. My galaxy is vast, and real space travel would take centuries between stars." The Emperor moved closer to the core, reaching out with one gauntleted hand. Energy sparked between his fingers and the containment field. "But your dilithium crystals, fascinating. They regulate matter-antimatter annihilation through crystalline resonance. In my reality, such crystals would be considered archaeotech, lost knowledge from humanity's golden age." "Can you enhance them?" Geordi asked, hope and skepticism warring in his voice. "No," the Emperor replied bluntly. "I can, however, modify your deflector dish to generate a focused tachyon pulse that will temporarily disrupt Borg adaptive shielding. The collective's adaptation protocols require 0.73 seconds to analyze and counter new weapons, generate sufficient variance in your attack patterns within that window, and you'll maintain offensive capability longer. 0.73 seconds. Geordi's fingers flew across his piad, running calculations. "How can you possibly know their exact adaptation speed?" The Emperor turned, and his expression held grim amusement. "Because, Chief Engineer, I've been observing your sensor logs from previous Borg encounters. Their adaptation follows exponential efficiency curves based on available processing power. It's mathematics, not mysticism. Though I confess, my experience fighting the Necrons, who adapted even faster, provides useful context." "Right, the soulless machine race you mentioned." Geordi paused. "Honestly, I'm having trouble wrapping my head around your universe. It sounds like everything there is specifically designed to kill humanity." "Not specifically," the Emperor corrected. "The universe is fundamentally hostile to all life. Humanity simply persists despite that hostility, through stubbornness, adaptability, and occasional brilliance. Much like your Federation, actually. Though you've had the advantage of forming alliances where my Imperium could not. Because you made humans supremacist," Geordi said carefully, treading on diplomatic ground. "From what you've described, your Imperium doesn't ally with alien species. You conquer or destroy them." The Emperor's silence stretched for several heartbeats before he responded. "In my youth, 28,000 years ago, I believed humanity and Xenos could coexist. I attempted to forge such alliances. Then I watched those aliens betray humanity during our most vulnerable moment, enslaving billions while we were too weak to resist. The Eldar allowed human worlds to burn so they could pursue their own decadence. The Orcs exist only to wage eternal war. The Tyranids are a galactic plague that consumes all biological matter. The Necrons view all life as an infestation. He turned back to the warp core. Your Federation allied with Vulcans, Andorians, Tellarites, species capable of reason and cooperation. I had no such luxury. My choices were conquer or be exterminated. I chose conquest. The raw honesty disarmed Geordi's judgment. This wasn't a monster making excuses. This was a being carrying 48 millennia of trauma and impossible decisions. The modifications you're suggesting, Geordi redirected, they'll help against one cube. But if the Borg send more, then you'll need more than modifications, the Emperor finished. You'll need to strike at their heart. The collective functions through subspace links, connecting all drones to central nexus points. The Queens. Sever enough connections simultaneously, and you create cascading network failures. But that requires deep penetration into their infrastructure, which is suicide for conventional forces. Unless you have unconventional forces, Geordi realized. Indeed. But such discussions are Captain Picard's domain, not mine to unilaterally decide. On the bridge, Commander Data sat in the captain's chair during Gamma Shift, monitoring long-range sensors with android precision. The Borg cube had closed to 8 light-years, maintaining steady warp velocity, predictable, inexorable. The turbo-lift doors opened and the Emperor emerged. At this late hour, the bridge crew consisted of junior officers who visibly tensed at his presence. To their credit, they maintained their duties despite the intimidating figure crossing toward the command area. Emperor, Data greeted, rising. "May I assist you?" "I was observing your ship's operations, Android Data." The Emperor studied the view screen displaying the tracking marker for the Borg cube. "Your crew maintains admirable discipline despite the approaching threat. In my Imperium's navy, ships facing the Borg's equivalent would be preparing for mutual destruction, victory through ensuring the enemy dies with you." "A grim philosophy," Data observed, "a necessary one when facing certain enemies. Though I notice your Federation has yet to face truly existential threat, the kind where defeat means the complete eradication of your species, not merely territorial loss." The Emperor turned his attention to Data fully. "You are fascinating, Data. An artificial consciousness granted rights, respect, and command authority. In my time, I created 20 beings like you, not machines, but bioengineered demigods called Primarchs. My sons, many turned against me, corrupted by chaos, half-waged war against their own father in the Horus Heresy, a civil war that nearly destroyed humanity forever." Data's positronic matrix processed that revelation. "You created sons who betrayed you, yet you continued fighting to save humanity. That suggests dedication beyond mere programming or instinct. Love, android. I loved my sons and I loved humanity. That love did not prevent my sons' betrayal, nor did it absolve them of consequences. I killed Horus, my most beloved son, when he fell to chaos and threatened to destroy everything I'd built." The Emperor's voice carried ancient grief. "Love does not preclude necessity. Remember that, Data. Your crew loves you. But if you were ever compromised, converted into a weapon against them, their love would not stay their hands, nor should it." An uncomfortable truth, Data admitted, yet accurate. "During my time, I have been compromised by enemies. Captain Picard chose to destroy me rather than allow my systems to be used against the Federation. Fortunately, he succeeded in reclaiming my autonomy first." A captain who makes hard choices when necessary. The Emperor nodded approvingly. Picard carries the weight of command well, though his idealism could prove fatal against sufficiently ruthless opponents. The Borg will test whether his principles can survive contact with reality. "You disapprove of our principles?" Data asked directly. "I envy them," the Emperor corrected, surprising Data. "Your Federation represents what I dreamed humanity could become: peaceful, exploratory, diverse, hopeful. But dreams shatter when nightmares arrive in force. I've watched too many idealistic civilizations fall because they refuse to acknowledge that some enemies cannot be reasoned with, only destroyed. The question isn't whether your principles are beautiful, Data. The question is whether they're sustainable against entropy." Before Data could formulate a response, the sensor console chirped urgently. The junior officer monitoring it, Ensign Hayes, called out with barely controlled alarm. "Commander Data, the Borg cube just accelerated to warp 9.6. New intercept time, 14 hours. Data's fingers moved across his console with superhuman speed. "Yellow alert. All senior staff to the bridge. Emperor, the Borg have altered their behavior pattern. They sense something unprecedented aboard this vessel," the Emperor said calmly, though his stance shifted subtly into combat readiness. The collective has calculated that my knowledge and power represent distinctiveness, valuable enough to justify expending significant resources. They will not approach cautiously, Data. They will assimilate this ship or destroy it, attempting to do so. "Then we must prepare for the confrontation of our lives," Data stated. "No, android." The Emperor moved toward the turbolift as klaxons began sounding throughout the ship. "You must prepare for what comes after the confrontation, because whether you prevail against this cube or not, the collective now knows your Federation exists, and more importantly, knows it possesses something they desperately want. This engagement will not end with this single ship. It will be the opening move in a war that will test whether your Federation's hope can survive the most patient, relentless enemy in your galaxy." As the Emperor departed to let the bridge crew work, Data processed those words while the Enterprise's senior staff began arriving, pulled from sleep by the escalating crisis. Captain Picard emerged from the ready room, already in uniform, his expression grim but determined. "Status, Mr. Data." "The Borg cube has accelerated significantly, Captain. Estimated intercept in 13 hours, 47 minutes. I believe they have detected the Emperor and adjusted their tactical approach accordingly." Picard stared at the view screen, at that small tracking indicator representing approaching assimilation, and made a decision that would ripple across the quadrant. "All hands, battle stations, red alert. This is Captain Picard." His voice carried throughout the ship with the authority of command and the weight of experience. "We are about to face the Borg once again, but this time we do so with knowledge from beyond our reality and with an ally whose very existence challenges what we thought possible. We will meet this threat as we always have, together with courage and with the conviction that there is always a better way. Picard out." In his quarters, the Emperor heard those words and felt something he hadn't experienced in millennia: uncertainty. This captain and his crew were about to face a test that would prove which vision of humanity held greater truth: the Emperor's proven, brutal pragmatism, forged in the fires of the galaxy's cruelest wars, or Picard's unproven hope that reason and cooperation could overcome even the most merciless foes. For the first time in 48,000 years, the Emperor of mankind genuinely didn't know which side would prevail. And that uncertainty, more than anything else in this strange universe, gave him something he'd thought long dead: hope. The briefing room had become a war council. Holographic displays projected the Borg cube's approach vector, while tactical simulations ran continuously, each one ending in the Enterprise's destruction or successful retreat, never decisive victory. Picard stood at the head of the table, his senior staff assembled alongside the towering golden figure who represented both their greatest asset and most profound philosophical challenge. "We have 11 hours before intercept," Picard began without preamble. "Commander LaForge, status on the Emperor's recommended modifications?" "Deflector dish recalibration is complete, Captain. The tachyon pulse generator is online, and I've programmed rotating frequency patterns into our phaser arrays. According to the Emperor's calculations, we should maintain offensive capability for approximately 18 seconds before the Borg fully adapt." Geordi paused, his expression troubled. "That's not much time, sir." 18 seconds of effective firepower against a Borg cube, Worf said grimly, is 17 seconds more than we typically achieve. If we coordinate alpha strikes during those windows, you'll damage their hull and destroy some drones, but you won't stop the cube, the Emperor interrupted, his voice filling the room with undeniable authority. A Borg cube contains approximately 129,000 drones, redundant power systems across multiple decks, and regenerative hull plating. You could maintain continuous effective fire for 3 minutes and still fail to achieve critical damage before they adapt completely. "Then what do you suggest?" Riker asked, frustration edging his tone. "We can't outrun them at their current speed. We can't fight them conventionally. And we can't surrender." "You can't, Commander, but I can." The Emperor's statement silenced the room instantly. "The Borg are coming for me specifically. They've detected a psychic and technological signature without precedent in their database. Every calculation in their collective consciousness identifies me as the highest value target they've ever encountered. If I allow myself to be taken..." "Absolutely not," Picard cut in sharply. "We don't sacrifice sentient beings to save ourselves, regardless of tactical advantage." "Captain, I'm not proposing sacrifice. I'm proposing infiltration." The Emperor leaned forward, his armored gauntlets resting on the table's surface. "The Borg will attempt to assimilate me. That process requires bringing me into physical contact with their alcoves, their vinculum, their queen herself. Once inside their infrastructure, I can strike at their nexus points with psychic force they cannot adapt to, because they have no frame of reference for weaponized consciousness on my scale." Beverly Crusher shook her head firmly. "You're talking about letting them inject you with nanoprobes, link you to their collective consciousness, and potentially assimilate you completely. The Borg don't just take your body, they take your mind, your identity, everything that makes you who you are." "Doctor, I have spent 10,000 years sitting upon the golden throne of Terra, my consciousness projected across an entire galaxy while my physical body withers to a corpse. I have fought demonic possession attempts from the Chaos Gods themselves, entities of such magnitude that their mere attention could shatter suns. The Borg Collective, formidable as it is, operates on principles I comprehend fully." The Emperor's certainty carried the weight of experience beyond mortal understanding. "They cannot assimilate what they cannot comprehend, and they fundamentally lack the capacity to comprehend me." "You're saying you're immune to Borg assimilation," Data observed analytically. "That would require resistance to both technological integration and psychic subjugation on levels that exceed documented capabilities of any species we've encountered. I am not saying I'm immune, android. I'm saying I am sufficiently resilient to resist long enough to destroy them from within." The Emperor straightened. "However, Captain Picard's objection stands. I will not violate his principles aboard his ship. Alternative strategies exist, less efficient, more costly in lives, but achievable. Picard studied the Emperor carefully, recognizing the genuine respect in that concession. This being could simply do as he pleased, the power differential made that obvious, yet he chose to operate within the Federation's moral framework. That choice mattered. "What alternatives?" Picard asked. The Emperor gestured, and golden psychic energy manifested above the table, forming a three-dimensional tactical display far more detailed than the holographic projections. Every person in the room felt the power radiating from that construct, raw will imposing structure on reality itself. The Borg cube's primary weakness is its propulsion system, the Emperor explained, and the psychic construct showed the cube's internal structure with impossible detail. They require transwarp coils to achieve faster-than-light travel. Destroy those coils, and you strand the cube at sublight speeds, vulnerable to concentrated fire from multiple Federation vessels. The coils are heavily shielded, but they emit a specific subspace signature during active operation that your torpedoes can be programmed to track. "How do you know their internal layout?" Riker demanded. "You've never encountered the Borg before. I analyzed your previous engagement logs with perfect recall, extrapolated their technological principles, and compared their design philosophy to similar synthetic species from my reality. The Necrons, for example, maintain technological redundancy through quantum entanglement. The Borg use subspace links. Different execution, identical strategic vulnerability, centralized coordination creating single points of failure. The Emperor's construct zoomed in on specific sections. Here, and here, the transwarp coil assemblies. Simultaneous strikes to all three locations will disable their faster-than-light capability. Worf leaned forward, studying the construct with a warrior's tactical mind. Those locations are deep inside the cube. We'd need to penetrate their shields, survive their tractor beams, and deliver precision strikes through meters of reinforced hull plating. Which is impossible for this single ship, the Emperor agreed. Unless you had a distraction significant enough to occupy their primary tactical attention, while a smaller craft, your shuttles, perhaps, made the actual attack runs. And you'd be that distraction, Picard realized. I would engage them directly, board their cube, fight through their drones, and force them to divert resources toward containing me. Your crew would have perhaps 10 minutes to execute the strike before the Borg overwhelmed even my defenses. The Emperor's golden eyes fixed on Picard. I am not proposing infiltration for assimilation, Captain. I'm proposing becoming the target too valuable and dangerous to ignore, buying your people time to cripple their ship. Counselor Troy, who had been silent until now, spoke softly. You're proposing to sacrifice yourself as a diversion. Despite claiming you won't violate our principles, you're still offering to die for strangers. I'm proposing to engage an enemy in direct combat, a scenario I've survived countless times across 48 millennia. The difference, Counselor, is that I'm choosing to coordinate with allies rather than fighting alone. The Emperor's tone softened slightly. And you are not strangers. You are humans who have achieved what I only dreamed possible. If my intervention here ensures your Federation's survival, then perhaps some small portion of my 10,000 years of sins gains redemption. The room fell silent as the weight of that statement settled over them. This being, this tyrant, this conqueror, this self-described monster, was seeking redemption by protecting the very ideals his own Imperium had abandoned. Picard made his decision. We'll proceed with a modified version of your plan. You'll engage the Borg cube and draw their tactical focus. Lieutenant Worf will lead an away team in the shuttle Curie, equipped with enhanced torpedoes programmed to track the transwarp signatures. But Emperor, Picard's voice carried absolute command. "You are to withdraw once the mission is complete. We don't trade lives, not even those offered willingly. You will survive this engagement. Is that understood?" The Emperor regarded Picard for a long moment, then inclined his head, the first time he'd shown such deference to anyone since arriving. "Understood, Captain. Though I warn you, the Borg may not grant me the luxury of tactical withdrawal once they recognize what I am. Still, I will do everything in my power to honor your command." "See that you do." Picard turned to his staff. "Commander Riker, coordinate with engineering on the torpedo modifications. Mr. Worf, select your away team, experienced personnel only, veterans of previous Borg encounters if possible. Counselor Troy, I want you monitoring the Emperor's psychic signature throughout the engagement. If he shows signs of compromise..." "You'll do what you must, Captain," the Emperor finished. "I would expect nothing less. Though I assure you, if the Borg somehow succeed in corrupting me, your problems will escalate from desperate battle to evacuation of this entire sector. Chaos-touched psychers in my reality have destroyed planets through psychic backlash. I would prefer not to test whether such catastrophes are possible in your universe." "Comforting," Geordi muttered. "Honesty, Chief Engineer, not comfort. You've asked a god being to fight on your behalf. Such entities come with proportional risks." The Emperor straightened to his full, imposing height. "I suggest you all prepare. The Borg arrive in 10 hours. After that, we discover whether your Federation's first principles can survive contact with the galaxy's most patient predator. For your sake, I genuinely hope they can, because if they cannot, this battle becomes merely the first of many, and the Borg have infinite patience while your resources remain finite." As the staff dispersed to their duties, Picard remained with the Emperor for a moment, studying this being who represented everything the Federation opposed, yet fought alongside them nonetheless. "You genuinely believe we'll fail," Picard said quietly. "Not today, perhaps, but eventually. I believe your Federation is precious, Captain. Precious things are fragile, and the universe is very, very harsh." The Emperor turned toward the viewport, staring at the stars. "But I have been wrong before. Perhaps your hope proves more resilient than my experience suggests. We shall see." Picard left the Emperor to his contemplation, returning to the bridge where 1,000 final preparations awaited. Behind him, the Emperor of Mankind stood alone, a being who had guided humanity through the cruelest darkness imaginable, now preparing to fight for humans who had found light without his guidance. For the first time in millennia, he prayed, not to gods he knew were false, but to the simple possibility that he might be wrong about the inevitability of darkness. The Borg cube continued its inexorable approach, and the final hours before battle counted down like heartbeats toward destiny. The transporter room hummed with barely contained energy as final preparations reached completion. The Emperor stood on the pad, his golden armor gleaming under the harsh lighting, his presence radiating psychic pressure that made even the veteran Chief O'Brien's hands tremble slightly at his controls. "Energizing in 30 seconds, O'Brien announced, his Irish accent thickening slightly with tension. "Emperor, you're certain about the coordinates? Transporting directly onto a Borg cube is..." "Suicide for anyone else," the Emperor finished calmly. "For me, merely inconvenient. Proceed, Chief." Picard stood alongside Riker and Data, watching this being who had become their unlikely ally prepare for what might be his final act. The Borg cube hung in visual range now, a perfect geometric nightmare of technology and assimilated matter. Its surface crawling with activity as thousands of drones detected the Enterprise's approach. "Emperor," Picard called out, unable to let this moment pass without acknowledgement. When you return, and you will return, we'll have many more discussions about your Imperium and our Federation. I suspect we both have much to learn from one another." The Emperor turned, and something approaching warmth flickered across his ancient features. "Captain, I have met countless leaders across 48,000 years, kings, tyrants, prophets, and generals. Few have impressed me as you have in these brief hours. Your conviction in the face of impossible odds reminds me of myself long ago, before necessity transformed idealism into pragmatism. Hold to that conviction, Jean-Luc Picard. The universe needs voices like yours, even when, especially when, they seem naive." "I prefer hopeful to naive," Picard replied with a slight smile. "As do I, Captain, as do I." The Emperor nodded to O'Brien. "I am ready, Chief. Begin transport." The transporter beam caught the Emperor in its familiar shimmer, but something was different. Golden light mixed with the standard blue-white energy signature, and for a moment, every psychically sensitive person aboard the Enterprise felt a presence so vast it seemed to encompass the entire ship, protective, ancient, and absolutely determined. Then he was gone. On the bridge, sensors tracked the Emperor's materialization aboard the Borg cube. Immediately, alarms erupted across every console. "Captain," Data reported with rare urgency in his synthesized voice, "the Borg cube's internal systems are experiencing massive disruptions. Power fluctuations across 40% of their grid, detecting weapons fire, Emperor-generated energy signatures unlike anything in our database." The view screen showed the cube's exterior, and suddenly entire sections of hull plating exploded outward as golden light erupted from within. The Borg vessel shuddered, its perfect geometric form compromised by internal violence of staggering magnitude. Troy gasped, one hand pressed to her temple. "Captain, the psychic signature. It's like a star going supernova inside that ship. The Borg drones. I can feel their confusion, their collective attempting to analyze and adapt, but they've never encountered anything like this." "Worf, launch the away team. Now," Picard commanded. "Acknowledged." Worf's voice came through the comm from the shuttle bay. "Curie departing in 5 seconds." On the main view screen, the Type 6 shuttle shot from the Enterprise's bay, immediately engaging evasive maneuvers as the Borg cube's tractor beams attempted to lock on. But the beams wavered, their coherence compromised by the chaos erupting inside the cube itself. Inside the Borg vessel, the Emperor of Mankind waged war on a scale that defied description. He had materialized in a central corridor surrounded by alcoves where drones stood in regeneration cycles. The moment his presence registered, every drone within range activated simultaneously, their cybernetic implants whirring to life as the collective identified the intruder. "We are the Borg. You will be assimilated. Your biological and technological distinctiveness will be added to our own. Resistance is futile." The Emperor's response came not in words but in psychic force. Golden flames erupted from his form, not consuming but purifying, a manifestation of will so absolute that it imposed his reality over theirs. The nearest drones didn't merely fall, they ceased functioning entirely, their connection to the collective severed by power, operating on principles the Borg had no capacity to understand. He moved through the corridors like vengeance given form. When drones approached, he obliterated them with gestures, telekinetic force that crushed their cybernetic components, psychic lightning that overloaded their neural implants, or simply his armored fists pulverizing them with strength that made their enhanced physiology seem fragile. The collective adapted, throwing greater numbers into the breach. Tactical drones equipped with energy weapons opened fire, their disruptor beams converging on the Emperor's position. He raised one hand and the attacks bent around him, absorbed by shields that existed solely through his will, imposing structure on subspace itself. Adaptation in progress, the monotone voices announced throughout the cube. Analyzing defensive capabilities. Adaptation complete. The drones modified their weapons, firing at frequencies designed to penetrate his shields. Several beams struck home, burning through his golden armor in places. The Emperor felt pain, genuine physical damage from enemies who had successfully adapted to his defenses. He smiled, a terrible, grim expression of satisfaction. "Finally," he said aloud, his voice resonating with multiple harmonics. "Worthy opponents. You learn, you adapt. You persist despite losses. You are not chaos, mindlessly corrupting. You are not orcs, existing only for violence. You are evolution perverted, progress without wisdom, efficiency without purpose, and you must be stopped." The Emperor's psychic power surged beyond what he had previously demonstrated. This was no longer restraint or measured response. This was the master of mankind, unleashing capabilities that had held back the Chaos Gods themselves for 10,000 years. The corridor exploded with golden radiance. Drones didn't merely shut down, they disintegrated, their matter subjected to forces that unraveled atomic bonds. The collective's adaptation protocols scrambled desperately, trying to analyze what was destroying their drones. But how could machines understand weaponized consciousness? How could technological adaptation counter the fundamental rejection of their existence by a being who imposed his will directly onto reality? Aboard the Enterprise, Troy screamed, overwhelmed by the psychic backlash. Beverly rushed to her side as the Betazoid's nose began bleeding. "Counselor!" Picard moved toward her, but Troy waved him back, her voice strained. I'm all right, Captain. But the Emperor, what he's doing inside that cube, it's not just fighting. He's making them understand they've encountered something beyond their capacity to assimilate. He's teaching them fear." "The Borg don't experience fear," Riker objected. "They do now," Troy whispered. On the view screen, the Borg cube's hull sections continued exploding outward. The perfect geometric surface cracked and fractured as internal systems overloaded. Yet the cube maintained its course, its propulsion systems still functional, its collective still attempting to counter the threat inside its structure. "Curie to Enterprise," Worf's voice came through clearly despite background interference. "We have penetrated the cube's shield perimeter. Beginning attack run on first transwarp coil assembly." "Acknowledged, Mr. Worf," Picard responded. "All power to weapons and shields. Prepare to provide covering fire." The Enterprise angled toward the Borg cube, phasers lancing out to intercept the defensive fire directed at the shuttle. Photon torpedoes streaked across the void, targeting the cube's weapon arrays with precision born of desperation. Inside the cube, the Emperor had fought his way to a central nexus chamber where hundreds of drones converged simultaneously. The sheer mass of bodies threatened to overwhelm even his capabilities through pure physical force. They swarmed him, their assimilation tubules extending, attempting to inject him with nanoprobes that would begin the conversion process. He let them, not from surrender, but from calculation. When the nanoprobes entered his bloodstream, they encountered biological systems that predated their entire species' existence. The Emperor's perpetual nature, his fundamental immortality, derived from genetic engineering and psychic augmentation beyond anything the Borg had ever assimilated. The nanoprobes attempted to rewrite his cellular structure and found themselves rewritten instead. Golden light erupted from every drone that had made contact, spreading through their collective link like a virus, but a virus of consciousness. For one terrible moment, approximately 3,000 drones experienced individuality. They remembered who they had been before assimilation. They felt the horror of what they had become. They understood loss. Then the collective severed those connections entirely, sacrificing 3,000 drones to contain the contamination. The Emperor smiled grimly as the now individualized drones collapsed around him, their link to the hive mind permanently destroyed. "You learn quickly," he acknowledged to the unseen intelligence coordinating the Borg response. "Willing to amputate infected limbs to preserve the body, a ruthless tactic. I approve, even as I exploit it." The first explosion rocked the cube as Worf's team destroyed the first transwarp coil assembly. The collective's attention split: maintain focus on the Emperor, or counter the shuttle destroying critical infrastructure. The Emperor pressed his advantage, fighting deeper into the cube's structure, drawing more drones away from defensive positions. Every step cost him. His armor bore scorch marks. His flesh beneath showed wounds that would have killed normal humans instantly, but merely slowed him. Yet he advanced, inexorable as the Borg themselves, demonstrating that tyrants and collectives shared one trait: absolute commitment to their purpose. The second transwarp coil exploded. The cube lurched in space, its perfect trajectory wavering. "Emperor," Picard's voice came through the comm badge they'd given him before transport. "2 coils down, 1 remaining. Withdraw now while you can." "Not yet, Captain," the Emperor responded, his voice strained but determined. "The Queen has taken notice. She's attempting to manifest directly. If I can engage her here..." "That was not part of the plan," Picard shouted with uncharacteristic vehemence. "Emperor, I ordered you to withdraw after mission completion." The Emperor paused in his advance, surrounded by the wreckage of hundreds of destroyed drones, golden blood leaking from a dozen wounds, and something that might have been respect colored his response. "Yes, Captain, you did." He turned, beginning his fighting retreat toward the outer hull. "Transporter lock coordinates transmitting. Get me out of here before the Queen arrives. I suspect even I would have difficulty surviving that encounter in my current state." The third explosion, the final transwarp coil, shook the cube violently. The massive vessel began losing cohesion, its systems cascading into failure without faster-than-light propulsion to maintain optimal power distribution. "Energizing," O'Brien's voice carried desperate focus. The Emperor materialized on the transporter pad, and the sight made even Picard's disciplined crew gasp. The golden armor was shattered in places, revealing the superhuman but wounded flesh beneath. His face bore cuts that leaked luminous blood, and his breathing, the first time they'd heard him breathe at all, came heavy and labored. He stepped down from the pad without assistance, though Beverly immediately moved to his side with her medical tricorder. "Don't," the Emperor said gently but firmly. "My biology operates on principles your medicine cannot address. I will regenerate given time. Focus on your crew. They require your expertise more than I do." On the bridge, the view screen showed the Borg cube dead in space, drifting with minimal power, its perfect geometry compromised by internal explosions and external battle damage. The Curie returned to the Enterprise, Worf reporting all personnel accounted for. "Captain," Data announced, "the Borg cube is attempting to establish subspace communications. They are broadcasting a message on all frequencies." "On screen," Picard ordered. The view screen filled with the image of the Borg Queen, a being of horrific beauty, cybernetic components integrated seamlessly with pale flesh, her eyes carrying intelligence that transcended the typical drone. "I am the Borg Queen. We have analyzed the entity you harbor aboard your vessel. It represents distinctiveness we have never encountered. Consciousness that rejects assimilation through force of will alone. This is problematic." Her expression, as much as a Borg could have one, showed something approaching curiosity. "Captain Picard, we remember you. Locutus, the one who was taken and returned. You understand the inevitability of the collective." Why do you resist with this ally who represents chaos incarnate? Picard stood, facing the Queen across the view screen with all the dignity of his command. Because chaos, true chaos, would be abandoning our principles when they become inconvenient. The Emperor fights alongside us because even tyranny can recognize when something greater than itself requires protection. We are the United Federation of Planets, and we will never surrender to your forced conformity. The Queen tilted her head, processing. The entity has damaged this cube beyond immediate repair. We are withdrawing to regenerate. But we will return, Captain Picard. The collective is patient. We will study this Emperor, we will adapt, and eventually we will assimilate you all. It is inevitable. The transmission ended. The Borg cube, maintaining minimal power, began a slow retreat at impulse speeds. The bridge crew allowed themselves a collective exhale. Victory, narrow and costly, but victory nonetheless. In the transporter room, the Emperor leaned against the bulkhead, his wounds already beginning to close through accelerated healing that defied medical explanation. Picard arrived to find him there, this being who had fought an army alone and survived. "You disobeyed my order to withdraw earlier," Picard said without heat. "I did," the Emperor acknowledged, "and you were correct to give it. Command requires balancing tactical necessity against the value of individual lives. You understand that balance better than most leaders I've known." He straightened, wincing slightly. "Your Federation passed its test today, Captain, but the Borg Queen spoke truth. They will return, and next time they will have adapted not just to your weapons, but to me. The challenge ahead grows more difficult, not less." "Then we'll face it together," Picard replied. "You've proven yourself an ally to the Federation today, Emperor. Whatever philosophical differences we maintain, you fought to protect this ship and its crew. That matters." The Emperor regarded Picard for a long moment, then extended one armored hand. Picard took it, the two leaders, one representing hope, one representing hard-won survival, sharing a moment of mutual respect across the vast gulf of their different humanities. "Perhaps, Captain," the Emperor said quietly, "your hope and my experience need not remain forever opposed. Perhaps they can teach one another." "I believe they already have," Picard replied. The Enterprise limped through space at reduced warp velocity, battle damage evident across multiple systems despite Geordi's teams working around the clock. In sickbay, Beverly Crusher treated the 14 wounded crew members with practiced efficiency, though her eyes kept drifting to the biobed readings that made no logical sense. Her analysis of the Emperor's blood samples revealed genetic complexity that shouldn't be possible and regenerative capabilities that exceeded even Klingon physiology by orders of magnitude. The Emperor himself had withdrawn to guest quarters, refusing further medical attention despite wounds that would have killed anyone else. According to internal sensors, his vital signs were stabilizing through sheer biological will, cells regenerating at visible rates, tissue reknitting without technological assistance. On the bridge, Picard reviewed damage reports while Data coordinated repair schedules with engineering. The victory felt hollow. Yes, they'd disabled one Borg cube. Yes, the Emperor had proven his value as an ally. But the Queen's parting words echoed in Picard's mind. "We will return." "Captain," Lieutenant Worf reported from Tactical, "long-range sensors detect no Borg activity within 20 light-years. The cube has withdrawn beyond sensor range." "Maintain yellow alert regardless," Picard ordered. "The Borg have surprised us before. I won't assume we're safe simply because..." Reality twisted. One moment, the bridge existed in normal space-time. The next, everything froze. Crew members suspended mid-motion, console displays locked in place, even the hum of the warp core silenced. Only Picard remained capable of movement. and he recognized this phenomenon immediately. "Q," he said with weary resignation. The entity materialized in the captain's chair with characteristic theatrical flair. An apparently human male in Starfleet Admiral's uniform, his expression carrying that insufferable mixture of amusement and cosmic superiority that had defined their every encounter. "Mon capitaine," Q exclaimed with exaggerated cheerfulness. "What a delightful mess you've created. I leave you alone for a few months, and you go and import a god tyrant from another reality. The Continuum is positively buzzing with gossip about this development." "Q, I don't have time for your games," Picard stated flatly. "Release my crew and explain why you're here." "Oh, but this isn't a game, Jean-Luc." Q's expression turned uncharacteristically serious. "I'm here because something impossible just happened, and the Continuum wants to understand it. You've brought a being into this reality who operates on principles that shouldn't exist here. The Emperor of Mankind, what a grandiose title, has psychic capabilities that draw from a dimension we don't have. Yet somehow he's adapting them to work with your subspace. That's not supposed to be possible. You're saying the Emperor's presence threatens the stability of our reality?" Picard demanded, alarm cutting through his fatigue. "Threatens? No. Intrigues? Absolutely." Q leaned forward, his cosmic nature momentarily visible in eyes that contained multitudes. "The Continuum has been observing humanity's potential for eons, Jean-Luc. We've tested you, challenged you, and occasionally saved you from yourselves. But this Emperor represents a version of humanity that achieved its potential through entirely different methods: brutality, tyranny, endless war, genetic engineering that borders on madness. And despite that path, or perhaps because of it, he possesses power approaching even the Continuum's own capabilities. You're threatened by him," Picard realized. "Threatened? Please, we're curious." Q snapped his fingers, and suddenly they both stood in an infinite white void, the bridge of the Continuum, where the Q existed as pure consciousness. Around them, vast intelligences manifested as geometric shapes, swirling energies, and incomprehensible forms. The Continuum wants to know, can two humanities exist simultaneously, the Federation's hopeful explorers and the Imperium's grim survivors? More importantly, what happens when they interact? "This is your doing," Picard's voice carried accusation. "You brought the Emperor here." "Not intentionally," Q admitted with rare honesty. "The dimensional rift was genuine, a cosmic accident, if you will. But once we detected it, we observed. We wanted to see what would happen when Jean-Luc Picard, humanity's idealistic champion, met the Emperor of Mankind, humanity's authoritarian protector. Would you recognize each other as kin? Would you fight? Would you learn from one another?" Q's expression turned contemplative. "And I must say, you've exceeded our expectations. You found common ground with the tyrant while maintaining your principles. Fascinating." "And now?" Picard asked tersely. "Will you send him back to his own reality?" "We could," Q mused. "But should we? The Emperor's presence has already changed the trajectory of multiple futures. The Borg are now aware that humanities exist capable of resisting assimilation through sheer force of will. Your Federation has gained tactical knowledge from 48,000 years of warfare, and perhaps most intriguingly," Q gestured and an image appeared. The Emperor standing on the Enterprise, surrounded by golden light that seemed to push back against the very fabric of reality. "He's changing, Jean-Luc, adapting not just his powers to your universe, but his philosophy. You're teaching him that hope isn't naivete, it's courage. And he's teaching you that sometimes survival requires harder choices than you'd prefer." The white void faded, and they stood again on the frozen bridge. Q's expression carried something Picard had rarely seen from the omnipotent entity: respect. "I came to warn you, Captain. The Emperor's presence has drawn attention from forces even the Continuum treats with caution. Your reality and his are bleeding together at the dimensional boundaries. Other things might slip through, entities from his warp, horrors you're unprepared to face. If that happens, the Federation will need to decide: maintain your ideals against enemies that those ideals cannot stop, or adopt the Emperor's methods and risk becoming what you despise." "You're saying we face an impossible choice," Picard said. "I'm saying you face the choice every civilization eventually confronts: adapt or perish. But here's the twist, Jean-Luc." Q leaned close, his voice losing all theatrical affectation. "The Emperor spent 48,000 years believing adaptation required abandoning hope. You've spent your career proving hope itself is the ultimate adaptation. One of you is right. The universe is about to test which one. And you won't interfere? Oh, I'll observe. The Continuum always observes. But this test, this is yours to pass or fail on your own merits." Q straightened, his Starfleet Admiral uniform shimmering. "Though I will offer one hint. The Emperor isn't your enemy, Jean-Luc. He's your mirror, showing you what humanity becomes when it faces true darkness and chooses survival over every other value. Whether that makes him a cautionary tale or a necessary evolution, that's what we're all waiting to discover." "One more question," Picard said quickly, sensing Q's imminent departure. "Can the Emperor return to his own reality?" Q paused, and genuine regret crossed his features. The dimensional rift is closing. Even the Continuum cannot hold it open indefinitely without risking catastrophic damage to both realities. The Emperor is, for all practical purposes, stranded here. Whatever happens next, Jean-Luc, you're stuck with each other. Make the most of it." With a characteristic snap of fingers, Q vanished. Time resumed instantly. Crew members continuing their interrupted movements, unaware that anything had occurred. Only Picard stood frozen, processing the implications. The Emperor was trapped here. The Borg would return with adapted strategies. And somewhere in the bleeding boundaries between realities, other threats might be emerging. "Captain?" Riker noticed Picard's expression. "Are you all right?" "We need to speak with the Emperor immediately," Picard said, already moving toward the turbo lift. "And assemble the senior staff. Q just paid us a visit, and his warnings suggest our situation is far more complex than a simple Borg encounter." As word spread through the ship that Q had appeared, Q, whose interventions always signaled cosmic-scale significance, the crew's relief at surviving the Borg encounter evaporated. They'd won one battle, yes, but the war that victory had inaugurated was only beginning to reveal its true scope. In his quarters, the Emperor sat in meditation, his wounds mostly healed, his consciousness extending through the ship's structure via psychic senses. He had felt Q's arrival, recognized the entity's power as comparable to the Chaos Gods, perhaps less malevolent, but equally dangerous. And he had perceived the fundamental truth Q had revealed to Picard. The dimensional rift was closing. Return to his Imperium was no longer possible. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Emperor of Mankind faced genuine uncertainty about his purpose. His Imperium, his wars, his sacrifices, his endless vigil from the Golden Throne. All of it continued without him, in a reality he could no longer reach. Meanwhile, this Federation represented everything he'd dreamed humanity could achieve, yet everything his experience suggested was unsustainable against true threats. Was he meant to protect them, transform them, learn from them, or simply exist here as a living reminder of what humanity could become under different circumstances? The Emperor had orchestrated the fates of quadrillions across millennia. He had planned wars spanning centuries, guided civilizations from the shadows, and anticipated threats before they materialized. Yet here, in this strange universe aboard this single ship, he found himself uncertain. It was, he reflected with dark amusement, almost refreshing. When the summons came from Captain Picard to attend an emergency briefing, the Emperor rose, his armor once again pristine through psychic restoration, his bearing regal, despite the profound exhaustion that 10,000 years of warfare had carved into his soul. He would meet with Picard and his staff. He would share what knowledge he possessed about entities that might slip through dimensional barriers. He would help them prepare for threats they couldn't yet imagine. And perhaps, if the universe allowed it, he would learn whether hope could truly survive the darkness, or whether his 48,000 years of experience would once again prove that survival required sacrificing everything beautiful about humanity to preserve humanity itself. The corridor lights flickered as he passed, responding to his psychic presence. Crew members pressed themselves against bulkheads, awed and terrified in equal measure. He was the emperor of mankind, tyrant, protector, god-king, and prisoner in a reality not his own. And whatever came next would test not just the Federation's ideals, but whether even immortal tyrants could learn to hope again. The observation lounge felt smaller with the Emperor's presence, despite its generous dimensions. The senior staff assembled with the grim efficiency of veterans who had survived one crisis only to face another. Picard stood at the head of the table, his expression carrying the weight of command alongside something more personal, the burden of bridging two incompatible visions of humanity's future. Q's visit confirms several uncomfortable truths, Picard began without preamble. First, the Emperor cannot return to his own reality. The dimensional rift is closing permanently. Second, that rift's existence has created instability between our realities that might allow other entities to cross over. And third, the continuum itself is observing this situation with interest that borders on concern. When Q expresses concern, Riker muttered, "We should be terrified." Q expressed curiosity more than concern, Commander, Data corrected with characteristic precision. However, his warning about entities from the Emperor's reality potentially crossing into ours merits serious consideration. Emperor, you have mentioned chaos and demons multiple times. Can you elaborate on these threats? The Emperor leaned forward, his golden armor gleaming under the observation lounge's lighting. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of nightmares made real. In my reality, there exists a parallel dimension called the Immaterium, or the Warp. It is a realm of pure psychic energy where thought and emotion become tangible. Every sentient being with consciousness contributes to the Warp through their thoughts, feelings, and dreams. Over millions of years, concentrated emotions have coalesced into entities, chaos gods, of such magnitude that they rival or exceed even Q's power. Gods? Beverly Crusher's skepticism was evident. You're describing literal deities. I'm describing psychic predators that feed on consciousness itself, the Emperor clarified. Korn, born from rage and bloodlust. Nurgle, spawned from despair and entropy. Tsiench, manifested from ambition and scheming. Slanesh, created from excess and sensation. These entities corrupt entire civilizations, transforming them into instruments of their own destruction. A single demon, a lesser fragment of their power, can possess a human and transform them into a creature capable of slaughtering thousands. The room fell silent as the implications settled over them like grave shrouds. And you believe these entities might cross into our reality? Worf asked, his Klingon warrior's pragmatism cutting through metaphysical horror. Not the gods themselves. They're too vast, too intrinsically tied to the Warp's existence. But lesser demons, possessed individuals, Warp-touched artifacts? Yes. The Emperor's expression hardened. If the dimensional boundaries have weakened sufficiently, Chaos will probe for entry points. They are patient, insidious, and utterly relentless. They offer power, knowledge, and transformation to those who accept their bargains, and those bargains always damn the recipient. Troy, who had been pale since the briefing began, spoke hesitantly. Emperor, when you fought the Borg, I felt your psychic presence. It was vast, yes, but fundamentally ordered. Consciousness with structure and purpose. What you're describing sounds like psychic chaos in the literal sense, thought without order, emotion without restraint. Precisely, Counselor. You understand correctly. The Emperor turned his attention to her fully, and Troy felt the weight of that ancient gaze. You are exceptionally vulnerable to chaos corruption. All empaths and telepaths are. Your abilities create direct pathways into your consciousness, pathways that demons can exploit. In my Imperium, we would either train you extensively in psychic defense or... He paused, choosing words carefully. We would eliminate you before you could be turned into a weapon against us. That's barbaric, Beverly protested immediately. That's survival, Doctor, the Emperor countered without heat. I have watched planets burn because a single untrained psyker became a demon gateway. I have ordered the deaths of billions to contain chaos incursions. My Imperium's brutality towards psykers derives from 10,000 years of learning that unchecked psychic power invites corruption more terrible than any plague. He looked at Troy again, and this time his voice softened. But Counselor Troy exists in a universe without the warp. Her abilities developed naturally without demonic predation. That suggests hope, the possibility that psychic power need not inevitably lead to damnation. You're saying we might be protected simply by our universe's nature? Data asked analytically. Your universe lacks the warp, which means chaos has no native foothold here. But if entities do cross through dimensional breaches, they will seek to establish footholds, corrupting individuals, creating cults, spreading their influence like infection. They will target the vulnerable, the desperate, the ambitious, the angry, and especially those with psychic potential. The Emperor straightened, his strategic mind clearly engaged. Captain, you must implement protocols immediately. Monitor your crew for psychological anomalies, restrict access to any unusual artifacts or phenomena, and most critically, do not allow anyone to accept offers of power or knowledge from sources they cannot fully explain. Picard absorbed this, his archaeological instincts warring with his command responsibilities. The idea of restricting investigation of new phenomena went against every principle of exploration the Federation held dear. You're asking us to abandon scientific curiosity in favor of paranoid caution, Picard observed. I'm asking you to survive. Captain, chaos preys on curiosity. A scientist investigating a strange signal becomes the vector for demonic possession. An engineer studying an unusual artifact becomes the anchor for a warp breach. I have seen it happen thousands of times across thousands of worlds. The Emperor's frustration bled through his controlled demeanor. Your Federation values knowledge and discovery. Admirable. But some knowledge carries prices you cannot imagine, and some discoveries should remain buried. That's antithetical to everything Starfleet represents, Riker argued. We're explorers. We seek out new knowledge specifically because it might be dangerous. To understand it, to learn from it, to grow beyond our current limitations. And that philosophy will get you all killed if chaos entities enter your reality, the Emperor stated bluntly. In my Imperium, we maintain the Inquisition, an organization empowered to investigate, contain, and purge any hint of chaos corruption through any means necessary. They operate outside normal law, Answer only to me, and wield authority to destroy entire worlds if necessary to contain corruption. I do not ask you to create such an organization. Your Federation would reject it utterly. But I do ask you to understand, some threats cannot be studied, negotiated with, or understood. They must simply be destroyed before they destroy you. The philosophical chasm between the Emperor's experience and the Federation's ideals yawned impossibly wide in that moment. Every person in the room recognized the fundamental incompatibility between seek out new life and new civilizations and destroy threats before investigating them. Geordie LaForge, ever the practical engineer, redirected toward concrete concerns. Assuming these chaos entities do appear, how would we detect them? What signatures should we look for? Psychic distortions, primarily. Counselor Troy would likely sense their presence before your technology detected anything. The Emperor gestured, and golden light formed above the table, a psychic construct showing swirling patterns of disturbing geometry. Warp energy manifests as impossible colors, non-Euclidean geometries, and violations of causality. Your instruments might register subspace distortions, but the primary indicators will be psychological. Sudden mood shifts in crew members, inexplicable violence, obsessive behavior, or individuals claiming to hear voices offering knowledge or power. Like telepathic contact, Troy realized, horror dawning in her voice. Precisely. Except telepathy connects consciousness to consciousness. Chaos connects consciousness to malevolent predation. The difference is subtle until it's too late. The Emperor's construct shifted, showing a humanoid figure gradually transforming into something nightmarish. Possession occurs in stages. First, doubt, questioning one's values, relationships, purpose. Second, temptation, offers that seem beneficial but carry hidden costs. Third, bargaining, accepting power in exchange for small compromises. Fourth, transformation, the victim's consciousness subsumed by the demon, their body warped into an instrument of chaos. By the fourth stage, the individual is lost beyond any salvation I've ever discovered. Beverly's medical training kicked in immediately. Is there any treatment? Any way to reverse the process in early stages? In my reality, sanctioned psychers can sometimes purge minor possessions through psychic combat, burning the demon out while the host survives. It's agonizing, dangerous, and often fails. The Emperor's expression turned grim. Your universe has no trained combat psychers. If possession occurs here, your only option is lethal force before the demon fully manifests. I recognize how abhorrent that sounds to your sensibilities, Doctor, but chaos leaves no room for humanitarian medicine. You cannot heal corruption that operates on metaphysical levels. The briefing had descended into nightmare territory. Q's cryptic warnings made horrifically concrete through the Emperor's experienced testimony. Picard recognized the crew's growing despair and knew he needed to restore some measure of hope. Emperor, you fought these entities for millennia and survived. That means they can be fought. It means they can be defeated. Picard's voice carried the authority that had guided his crew through countless crises. We may not have your Imperium's resources or your psychic capabilities, but we have something your reality apparently lacks. Species working together in genuine cooperation. Humans, Vulcans, Andorians, Betazoids, and dozens of others pooling their strengths. If chaos entities do appear, we'll face them together, with combined knowledge and capabilities. A valid point, Captain, the Emperor acknowledged. Your Federation's diversity might actually provide unexpected resilience. In my Imperium, humanity stands alone by necessity. Trusting aliens proved catastrophic during Old Night. But your reality allowed for genuine interspecies cooperation to develop. That represents strength I never achieved. He paused, something approaching uncertainty crossing his ancient features. I have spent 48,000 years fighting darkness with brutality, suppression, and endless war. Perhaps your methods, cooperation, hope, diversity, offer alternative strategies I never considered possible. I am not unwilling to learn. The admission stunned the room into silence. This being, this tyrant god who had ruled a million worlds through absolute authority, was conceding that his methods might not represent the only path to survival. Picard seized the moment. Then we'll move forward together. You provide your expertise on chaos threats. We provide our principles and our diverse approaches to problem solving. If entities do cross into our reality, we'll face them as allies. The Federation's hope backed by your experience. An alliance of philosophies as much as personnel, Data observed. Fascinating. The Emperor represents pragmatic authoritarianism developed across millennia of warfare. The Federation represents optimistic cooperation developed across centuries of peace. Combined, they might create a third approach superior to either alone. Or they might create confused hesitation that gets everyone killed, Worf countered grimly. We must establish clear protocols. Who commands in crisis situations? Whose judgment prevails when philosophies conflict? Captain Picard commands, the Emperor stated immediately, surprising everyone again. This is his ship, his crew, his reality. I am the outsider here, a guest, however powerful. I will offer counsel, provide capabilities, and fight alongside you, but command authority remains with your captain. I have ruled for too long, Commander Worf. Perhaps it's time I learned to serve instead. The sheer weight of that concession, the Emperor of mankind who had commanded billions, choosing to subordinate himself to Picard's authority, demonstrated more powerfully than any words that this being was genuinely adapting to their reality. Picard rose, extending his hand across the table. The Emperor stood, towering over everyone, and took that hand in his armored gauntlet, a gesture of partnership between two visions of humanity's future. Then we face whatever comes together, Picard declared. Emperor, you're no longer stranded here. You're a member of this crew, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. We'll protect you as you've protected us, and together we'll prove that hope and experience need not remain eternally opposed. The Emperor held Picard's gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I accept, Captain. Though I warn you, this alliance will test both our philosophies to their absolute limits. The universe has never been kind to idealists, and I fear it will not start now. Then we'll teach it kindness, Picard replied with the conviction that had made him Starfleet's finest captain. As the briefing dispersed and the crew returned to their duties, none of them noticed the subtle distortion forming in deep space behind the Enterprise, a tear in space-time so small that sensors dismissed it as quantum fluctuation. Through that microscopic breach, something ancient and malevolent tasted this new reality for the first time, finding it ripe with emotions to feast upon, souls to corrupt, and most deliciously, a conflict between hope and despair waiting to be exploited. The war between the Federation's ideals and the Emperor's pragmatism was about to begin in earnest, with the fate of this entire reality hanging in the balance. 3 days after Q's warning, the Enterprise continued its journey towards Starbase 157 for repairs, the crew maintaining heightened vigilance while attempting to process the philosophical earthquake the Emperor's presence had triggered. In 10 forward, crew members gathered in small groups, their conversations inevitably turning to the being who had fought an army alone and survived, the tyrant who now walked among them as an ally. The Emperor himself sat in a corner booth, specially reinforced to accommodate his size, observing the crew's social dynamics with the attention of someone who had studied human behavior for 48 millennia. Guinan, the enigmatic bartender whose species possessed their own temporal sensitivities, approached with a glass of something golden that caught the light strangely. "I thought you might appreciate this," she said, setting the glass before him. "Saurian brandy, aged 200 years. Not much compared to your lifespan, but it's the best we have." The Emperor studied the El-Orian woman with interest. "You're not human, yet you serve aboard this vessel in a position of significant informal influence. In my Imperium, such integration between species occurs rarely and never without human authority maintaining dominance." "Your Imperium sounds lonely," Guinan replied, sitting across from him without invitation, a boldness that intrigued him. Humanity standing alone against the universe, never trusting, never truly cooperating. That's not strength, Emperor. That's isolation. Isolation that preserved humanity when trust would have meant extinction, he countered, though without heat. "The Eldar, a species in my reality similar to your Vulcans in longevity and psychic capability, allowed human worlds to burn during our darkest hour because our suffering was inconvenient to their plans. Trust requires reciprocity, and the universe I know offers none. But this isn't your universe," Guinan observed gently. "This is a place where Vulcans helped humanity rebuild after first contact, where Andorians and Tellarites put aside centuries of conflict to form a federation, where hope proved stronger than fear." She leaned forward, her ancient eyes meeting his. "You've spent 48,000 years believing survival requires cruelty. What if you're wrong? What if the cruelty itself became the threat you were trying to prevent?" The Emperor was silent for a long moment, turning the glass in his armored fingers. "I have asked myself that question 10,000 times from the Golden Throne, Guinan. Every time I ordered a world burned, every time I sanctioned the deaths of innocents to contain corruption, every time I chose survival over mercy, and every time the alternative scenarios I envisioned ended in humanity's extinction." He raised the glass, studying the amber liquid. "But here, in your reality, humanity thrived without my iron fist. That challenges everything I believed necessary. It suggests that perhaps I damned myself and my species needlessly. Or perhaps, Guinan suggested, your cruelty was necessary in your universe, but not in this one. Different realities, different rules. The question isn't whether you were wrong then. It's whether you can learn to be different now." Before the Emperor could respond, the ship's red alert klaxons shattered the peaceful atmosphere. Picard's voice came through the comm system with controlled urgency. "All hands to battle stations. Senior staff to the bridge immediately. We have a situation." The Emperor rose with liquid grace, his presence immediately commanding every eye in 10 forward. "Whatever comes, crew of the Enterprise, remember, you have faced the Borg and prevailed. You possess courage beyond measure. Hold to that." He strode toward the turbolift, and despite their fear, crew members felt reassured by his confidence. Tyrant. He might be, but he was their tyrant now, and his certainty carried its own strange comfort. On the bridge, Picard stood before the view screen where an impossible sight demanded attention. Space itself was bleeding, a wound in reality perhaps 3 meters across, its edges writhing with colors that hurt to observe. Through that tear, energy leaked into normal space, sickly greens, pustulant yellows, and violets that seemed to vibrate at frequencies that shouldn't exist. "Report," the Emperor commanded as he emerged from the turbolift, immediately grasping the situation's severity. "Subspace rupture appeared approximately 3 minutes ago," Data reported, his android precision providing clarity amid crisis. Energy signatures are unlike anything in our database. They do not correspond to known dimensional phenomena, wormholes, or quantum fluctuations. More concerning, Counselor Troy collapsed the moment the rupture appeared. The Emperor moved to where Beverly knelt beside Troy, who lay unconscious on the deck, her face twisted in distress even in unconsciousness. He placed one armored hand near her head, not touching but sensing, and his expression hardened into grim recognition. "Warp breach," he stated flatly. "Small but stable, and something is trying to come through." He looked at Picard with absolute seriousness. "Captain, you must destroy that rupture immediately. Target it with everything you have. Phasers, torpedoes, concentrated antimatter if necessary. Seal it before anything emerges." "We don't even know what it is," Riker protested. "Standard protocol is to investigate, gather data. Standard protocol will get everyone aboard this ship killed or worse." The Emperor's voice carried psychic harmonics that made everyone on the bridge wince. "That rupture connects to the warp. I can sense the entities beyond it, testing this reality's defenses, searching for consciousness to corrupt. If they establish even a minor foothold here, this entire sector becomes infected." Picard made his decision. "Mr. Worf, target the anomaly. Full phaser banks, maximum intensity." "Aye, Captain." Worf's fingers flew across tactical. Firing. Golden beams lanced across space, striking the rupture directly. The wound in reality shuddered, contracted slightly, then expanded violently, doubling in size. Alarms erupted across every console as the rupture began pulling at the Enterprise itself with gravitational force that shouldn't exist. "It's feeding on our energy weapons," Data reported with rare alarm. "Captain, recommend immediate cessation of fire." "Belay that order." The Emperor moved to the center of the bridge, golden light beginning to radiate from his form. "The rupture is already open. Conventional weapons cannot close it, they'll only make it worse. This requires psychic force." "Emperor, what are you doing?" Picard demanded as the golden light intensified, spreading across the bridge like dawn breaking over mountains. "What I have done 10,000 times before, Captain, holding back the darkness." The Emperor raised both hands toward the view screen, and the bridge crew felt his presence expand beyond the ship, beyond physical space, touching the rupture with will made manifest. The wound in reality screamed, a sound that existed only in consciousness but tore at sanity nonetheless. Through the breach, shapes began forming, geometries that violated Euclidean space, limbs that existed in too many dimensions, eyes that opened onto vistas of madness. Demons, lesser fragments of chaos itself, seeking entry into a reality unprepared for their existence. The Emperor's psychic might crashed against them like a tsunami of pure order against corruption. Golden fire met postulant green energy at the rupture's threshold. On the view screen, reality itself warped as two fundamentally opposed forces contested the dimensional boundary. "Captain," Data announced, his voice tight with unprecedented stress, "subspace throughout this region is destabilizing. The conflict between the Emperor's psychic energy and the entities attempting entry is creating cascading failures in the fabric of space-time. If this continues, we may experience a complete dimensional collapse." "Emperor!" Picard shouted over the psychic storm raging on his bridge. "You're tearing reality apart. The alternative is allowing chaos entry." The Emperor's voice resonated with multiple harmonics as he channeled power that made the air itself luminous. "If even one demon manifests fully in your reality, Captain, it will corrupt everything it touches, spreading like plague across your Federation, turning your people into instruments of their own destruction. I will not allow that to happen." Sweat, golden, luminous sweat, beaded on the Emperor's forehead as he poured more power into sealing the breach. The demons on the other side pressed harder, sensing unprecedented resistance, but also unprecedented opportunity. This new reality represented virgin territory, uncorrupted consciousness ripe for harvest. Then Counselor Troy stirred, her eyes opening to reveal an expression of absolute terror mixed with determination. She stood despite Beverly's protests, moved to the Emperor's side, and did something that would be debated in psychological journals for decades. She opened her empathic abilities fully, linking her consciousness to his. The Emperor gasped, the first sound of surprise he'd made since arriving. Through Troy's empathic connection, he experienced something he hadn't felt in millennia, another consciousness supporting him not through fear or duty, but through genuine compassion and choice. "I can feel them," Troy whispered, tears streaming down her face as she shared the Emperor's psychic perception. "The things beyond that rupture, they're hungry, malevolent, endless. But you've fought them for so long. You're so tired. Let me help carry the weight." "Counselor, you cannot," the Emperor began. "I'm a Starfleet officer," she interrupted firmly, her voice gaining strength. "We face the unknown together. You don't have to bear this alone anymore." The combined psychic might, the Emperor's vast experience and power, joined with Troy's compassionate empathy, achieved what neither could have managed separately. The rupture began contracting, its edges pulling inward as golden fire overwhelmed the pustulant energies leaking through. The demons beyond screamed in frustrated rage, their chance at entry slipping away. One final push, both the Emperor and Troy crying out in unified exertion, and the breach collapsed entirely, sealed by psychic force reinforced with empathic connection. Silence crashed over the bridge like a physical thing. The Emperor and Troy collapsed simultaneously, Beverly catching the Counselor while Riker and Worf managed to slow the Emperor's fall enough that he didn't damage the deck plating. "Medical emergency," Beverly called, already scanning both patients with her tricorder. Both show signs of extreme psychic exhaustion. Emperor's vital signs are... Actually, I have no idea if these readings are normal for him or not. Counselor Troy's neural activity is off the charts. She shouldn't be conscious at all with these patterns. Did we succeed?" Troy asked weakly, looking up at Beverly with exhausted eyes. "The rupture is sealed," Data confirmed, studying his sensors. "No dimensional anomalies detected. Subspace stability returning to normal parameters. Whatever entities were attempting entry have been denied." Picard knelt beside the Emperor, this being who had fought with everything he possessed to protect a reality not his own. "Emperor, can you hear me?" The golden eyes opened slowly, focusing on Picard with effort. "Your counselor," he said quietly, his voice strained but carrying genuine wonder, "is far stronger than she knows. In my reality, she would be a sanctioned psyker of considerable rank. Here, she chose to face demonic corruption directly to aid a stranger." He managed a slight smile. "Perhaps your Federation's strength lies not in individual power, Captain, but in this, the willingness to share burdens rather than bear them alone." "That's what we've been trying to tell you," Picard replied with his own slight smile. "We're stronger together than apart. It's the founding principle of the Federation." "Then perhaps," the Emperor whispered as exhaustion claimed him, "I have finally found the lesson 48,000 years could not teach me, and it took being stranded in another reality to learn it." As medical teams arrived to transport both the Emperor and Troy to sickbay, Picard stood and addressed his bridge crew, his family who had just witnessed the collision of two humanities and emerged stronger for it. "What we witnessed today," he said quietly, "was the Emperor of mankind learning to accept help, and Counselor Troy teaching a 48,000-year-old tyrant that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the foundation of genuine strength." He looked at each officer in turn. We face challenges ahead that we cannot yet imagine. But if we can teach the Emperor to hope, and if he can teach us to recognize true threats, perhaps together we'll forge something neither of our humanities could achieve alone. The crew returned to their stations, processing what they'd experienced. The Borg had tested their tactical capabilities, Q had tested their philosophical foundations, and now Chaos had tested their very souls. They had passed, barely, but they had passed. And the Emperor of Mankind, lying unconscious in sickbay beside Counselor Troy, dreamed for the first time in millennia. Not nightmares of endless war, but possibilities of what humanity might become when hope and experience finally learned to walk together. Starbase 157 materialized on the view screen 3 days later, a massive space station representing the Federation's commitment to exploration, cooperation, and mutual defense. The Enterprise limped into dock with visible battle damage, its arrival causing immediate attention from Starfleet Command. After all, it wasn't every day a Federation vessel returned from engaging the Borg alongside a being who claimed to be humanity's immortal God Emperor from another reality. In sickbay, the Emperor had recovered fully, his perpetual nature regenerating damage that would have killed anyone else. Beverly had spent 72 hours analyzing his biology and finally admitted defeat. His genetic code operated on principles that made Klingon redundancy look primitive. Counselor Troy, similarly recovered, had emerged from the experience fundamentally changed. She touched consciousness that spanned millennia and fought entities of pure malevolence. The experience had expanded her empathic abilities while simultaneously teaching her shields she'd never known were possible. Now, in the observation lounge, Picard faced a subspace communication with Admiral Nechayev and the Federation Council. The Emperor stood beside him, a silent golden presence that dominated the visual frame. Nechayev's expression carried the controlled skepticism that had defined her career. "Captain Picard, your report reads like science fiction," Nechayev began without preamble. "A dimensional rift, an immortal emperor from another reality, chaos entities attempting entry into our universe, the Borg adapting specifically to counter this new threat. I need to know, is this being standing beside you an asset or a liability to the Federation?" The Emperor spoke before Picard could respond. "Admiral, I am both. I possess knowledge spanning 48,000 years of warfare, technological innovation, and psychic development. I can teach your Federation how to counter threats you've never imagined and prepare for enemies your idealism leaves you vulnerable against. However, I also represent philosophical challenges to everything your Federation values. I am a tyrant who ruled through authoritarianism, a conqueror who committed xenocide, and a pragmatist who sacrificed freedom for survival. Whether I am asset or liability depends entirely on whether you can integrate my experience without abandoning your principles." Nechayev processed that brutal honesty. "You're saying you'll challenge us?" "I'm saying I already have, Admiral. Captain Picard and his crew faced the Borg with my assistance and emerged victorious. Counselor Troy faced chaos entities directly to seal a dimensional breach. Commander LaForge integrated technology from my reality's principles with your own. Every member of this crew has been forced to confront the question, can hope survive when true darkness arrives? And they answered that question through action rather than rhetoric. The Emperor fought to protect this ship and its crew, Picard added firmly. He subordinated himself to my command, despite possessing power that could have made him dictator. He shared knowledge freely, fought alongside us as an equal, and when chaos threatened, he risked everything to seal that breach. I recommend the Federation extend guest status and work with him to prepare for potential future incursions." The Federation Council members visible on the split screen exchanged glances. A Vulcan, an Andorian, a Tellarite, and several humans, each processing the implications through their species' particular perspectives. The Vulcan counselor spoke with characteristic logic. "Emperor, your reality apparently developed without the cooperation between species that defines our Federation. Yet you now advocate for integration of your knowledge with our principles. That represents a significant philosophical shift. What changed?" The Emperor was silent for a moment before responding with raw honesty. "I spent 48,000 years believing humanity must stand alone to survive. I built an imperium of 1,000,000 worlds held together through force, fear, and genetic supremacy. I created demigod sons and watched half of them fall to chaos despite, or perhaps because of, my tyrannical methods. And I sat upon a golden throne for 10,000 years, a corpse emperor maintaining an empire through psychic power and posthumous authority." He gestured to the Enterprise crew visible through the observation lounge windows. "Then I encountered a reality where humanity thrived without my iron fist, where cooperation exceeded conquest, where hope proved more sustainable than fear. Counselor Troy taught me that shared burdens defeat individual tyranny. Captain Picard demonstrated that principles maintained under pressure possess greater strength than expedience. If 48,000 years of experience can still learn, Admiral, then I am learning that perhaps my methods were necessary in my reality, but not universal truth." "Pretty words," the Tellarite counselor grunted skeptically. "But Tellarites value honesty over diplomacy. What do you want, Emperor? What's your goal here?" "Redemption," the Emperor replied simply, surprising everyone. "I have committed atrocities in the name of survival. I have ordered worlds burned, species exterminated, and freedoms crushed. I did these things because I believed them necessary, and in my reality they may have been. But here I see an alternative. If I can help your Federation survive the threats I know are coming, the Borg's inevitable return, potential chaos incursions, other dangers you're unprepared for, then perhaps some small portion of my sins finds absolution. I do not ask for forgiveness, Council. I ask only for the opportunity to serve rather than rule." The honesty in that statement silenced the skeptics. This wasn't a conqueror seeking power. This was a being carrying 48,000 years of guilt, seeking purpose beyond tyranny. Admiral Nechayev made her decision. Guest status is granted with conditions. You'll be assigned to the Enterprise as a special tactical consultant. Captain Picard retains full command authority. You'll submit to regular psychological evaluations and consent to monitoring of your activities. And if you demonstrate any intention to impose authoritarian control over Federation citizens or territories, that status will be revoked immediately and you'll be confined. Are these terms acceptable?" "Completely acceptable, Admiral," the Emperor agreed without hesitation. "I have ruled long enough. It's time I learned to serve." The transmission ended and Picard turned to face the Emperor directly. "You understand what you've committed to. You're one of the most powerful beings in known existence, yet you've placed yourself under Starfleet authority. Many would consider that humiliation. Many would be fools," the Emperor replied. "True strength isn't dominating others, Captain. It's knowing when to lead and when to follow. For 48,000 years, I led because no one else could. Here in your Federation, I found people capable of leadership I can finally trust. That's not humiliation, it's liberation." Riker, who had been observing silently, spoke up. "So what happens now? The Borg know about you. Chaos has tasted this reality. Q and the Continuum are watching with interest. We've basically painted a target on the entire Federation." "We prepare," the Emperor stated with the certainty of someone who had prepared for war across millennia. I will teach your tactical officers everything I know about fighting collective consciousness entities. I will work with your scientists to develop defenses against psychic corruption. I will train Counselor Troy and any other telepaths willing to learn in psychic defense techniques. And when the threats come, and they will come, Commander, the Federation will face them not as naive idealists, but as informed optimists backed by 48,000 years of hard-won experience. Informed optimists, Picard repeated, a smile crossing his face. I like that phrasing. It suggests we can maintain our hope while acknowledging reality's harshness. Precisely, Captain. Your Federation represents what I dreamed humanity could become. My Imperium represents what humanity became to survive. Between us, perhaps we forge a third path, one that combines idealistic goals with pragmatic methods, that maintains hope while acknowledging darkness, that seeks cooperation while remaining prepared for war. Data, ever the analyst, observed, "You are describing a synthesis of philosophies, the Federation's optimistic cooperation tempered by the Emperor's experienced pragmatism. Theoretically, such synthesis could produce civilization more resilient than either source alone." Theoretically, Worf grunted, his Klingon skepticism evident. But theory and practice are different. The Emperor speaks of teaching us his methods. But methods developed through tyranny may not transfer to democratic systems. Then we adapt them, Troy said, entering the conversation with newfound confidence born from her shared experience with the Emperor. He's already proven he can adapt, subordinating himself to Captain Picard, accepting Federation authority, learning that shared burdens exceed individual power. If a 48,000-year-old tyrant can learn new approaches, surely we can learn from his experience without adopting his authoritarianism. The Emperor turned to Troy with something approaching paternal pride. The Counselor speaks wisely. I offer knowledge, not control. How you apply that knowledge remains your choice. But I warn you all. His expression hardened. The Borg will return with adapted strategies. They now know this reality contains beings capable of resisting assimilation through psychic force. They will develop countermeasures, bring greater numbers, and approach with tactics designed specifically to neutralize me. The easy victory we achieved will not repeat. Then we'll achieve harder victories, Picard declared with the conviction that had made him Starfleet's finest captain. Together, the Federation doesn't face threats alone anymore. We have an ally whose experience spans longer than our entire civilization. And you, Emperor, are no longer alone bearing the weight of humanity's survival. We carry it together now. The observation lounge fell silent as that truth settled over everyone present. Two humanities, one forged in hope, one tempered in despair, had found common ground. The path ahead remained uncertain. The threats imminent, the philosophical tensions unresolved, but they would face those challenges together. Computer, Picard said formally, add to the ship's log. The Emperor of Mankind is hereby assigned to the USS Enterprise as Special Tactical Consultant, guest status, under my direct command authority. His knowledge and capabilities are to be integrated with Starfleet protocols while maintaining Federation principles. This arrangement represents an unprecedented alliance between realities and a statement that hope and experience need not remain forever opposed. Log entry recorded, the computer's feminine voice confirmed. The Emperor extended his armored hand to Picard one final time. Thank you, Captain, for giving me purpose beyond tyranny, for teaching an old tyrant new approaches, for demonstrating that humanity's greatest strength is not domination, but cooperation. Picard took that hand firmly. Thank you, Emperor, for fighting alongside us, for sharing knowledge you could have withheld, for choosing to serve rather than conquer. Together, we'll prove that the Federation's ideals can survive even the darkest threats. As the senior staff dispersed to their duties, preparing the ship for extended dock time, coordinating with Starbase personnel, beginning the long process of repair and recovery. None of them noticed the distant sensor anomaly that flickered briefly before vanishing. Deep in unexplored space, the Borg Collective analyzed their defeat, adapted their protocols, and began constructing countermeasures against psychic warfare. And in dimensions beyond normal space, where the warp touched reality's boundaries like infection, probing healthy tissue, chaos entities that had tasted this new universe plotted their next attempt at entry. They had been denied once, yes, but chaos was patient, infinitely patient. The Emperor sensed these distant threats through psychic awareness that spanned light years. He said nothing to the crew. They deserved this moment of victory, this brief respite before the next crisis. But he knew, with the certainty of 48,000 years' experience, that this battle had been merely the opening move in a war that would test whether the Federation's hope could truly survive the galaxy's endless darkness. He found himself hoping, genuinely hoping for the first time in millennia, that they could. Because if they couldn't, then everything he had suffered, everything he had sacrificed, everything his Imperium had endured, had been for nothing. But if they could, if this Federation's idealistic cooperation proved more resilient than his proven tyranny, then perhaps humanity's future lay not in the Imperium's grim darkness, but in the Federation's hopeful light. Either way, the Emperor of mankind would stand beside them, not above them as ruler, but alongside them as ally, not commanding through fear, but serving through choice. It was, he reflected, with something approaching peace, the first time in 48,000 years he'd felt genuinely free. The weeks following the Emperor's integration into Starfleet operations proved transformative for both the Federation and the ancient being himself. Captain Picard's reports documented an entity learning to function within democratic systems after millennia of absolute authority, not without difficulty, but with genuine commitment to the attempt. The Emperor established training protocols for Starfleet tactical officers, sharing knowledge of collective consciousness warfare that immediately proved valuable. Counselor Troy, working closely with him, developed psychic defense techniques that soon spread throughout the Federation's telepathic community. Engineers studied his insights into dimensional mechanics, preparing defenses against potential chaos incursions. And philosophers across dozens of worlds debated the implications of two humanities, one hopeful, one pragmatic, finding common ground. Yet shadows gathered at the edges of known space. The Borg Collective adapted, their vast computational resources analyzing how consciousness itself had resisted assimilation. In deep space laboratories, they developed new protocols, not to assimilate the Emperor's power, but to neutralize it through quantum-level disruption of psychic energy. They would return, as they always did, more dangerous than before. And where dimensional barriers had weakened, chaos probed continuously for entry. The gods of the warp couldn't manifest directly in this reality. Their nature fundamentally required the Immaterium's existence, but lesser entities tested boundaries constantly. Cults began forming on isolated worlds, their members experiencing dreams of power, visions of transformation, whispers of knowledge that came at terrible prices. Section 31 found itself combating threats. They had no framework to understand, reaching out to the Emperor for expertise, even as they debated whether his very presence invited the dangers they fought. The Emperor stood on the Enterprise's observation deck one evening, watching stars that represented both hope and threat. Behind him, Captain Picard approached with 2 glasses of Earl Grey tea, a gesture of friendship that the ancient being had come to genuinely appreciate. "Penny for your thoughts," Picard offered, handing over 1 glass. The Emperor accepted it, studying the liquid with amusement. "I was contemplating irony, Captain. I spent 48,000 years fighting to ensure humanity's survival, only to discover an alternate timeline where humanity thrived without my intervention. Now, stranded here, I find myself fighting to preserve this kinder reality against threats my very presence may have attracted. "You didn't ask to come here," Picard observed. "The dimensional rift was an accident." Q confirmed it. "Accidents have consequences nonetheless. The Borg now hunt for psychic-capable beings across your galaxy. Chaos has tasted this reality and found it appetizing. Your Federation faces threats it was never designed to counter, threats I am intimately familiar with." The Emperor sipped the tea, savoring its simple elegance. "Yet, despite that, I find myself grateful. Here, I am not the corpse emperor entombed on a golden throne, sustained by daily sacrifice of thousands. Here I am simply ally, consultant, teacher, perhaps even friend." "You are all of those things," Picard confirmed, "and the Federation is stronger for your presence, Emperor. Yes, you've attracted threats, but you've also provided knowledge to counter them. That's the essence of exploration. Encountering the unknown brings both danger and opportunity. We wouldn't be the Federation if we chose isolation over engagement, even when engagement invites existential threats. Especially then." Picard gestured toward the stars beyond the viewport. "Every species we've encountered, Vulcans, Klingons, Romulans, even the Borg, represented existential threats at first contact. Yet we engaged them, sought understanding, and where possible, built cooperation from confrontation. You represent the same principle at cosmic scale. You're a threat. Yes, but also our greatest asset against threats we couldn't face alone." The Emperor was silent for a long moment, processing that perspective. Finally, he smiled, a genuine expression of warmth that transformed his ancient features. "Captain Jean-Luc Picard, in 48,000 years, I have met perhaps a dozen leaders I would call peers. You are now among them. Your Federation's hopeful idealism, tempered by your personal understanding of darkness, represents wisdom I never achieved. Whatever comes, Borg, chaos, Q's continued interference, or threats we cannot yet imagine, I am honored to face it alongside you." They stood together in comfortable silence, two visions of humanity watching the same stars and seeing different possibilities. The optimist who believed in hope, the pragmatist who had learned its value. Together, they represented something neither could achieve alone: informed optimism backed by experienced determination. Across the galaxy, the Borg prepared. In dimensions beyond reality, chaos plotted. And in the spaces between stars, the Q continuum watched with anticipation to see which philosophy, hope, or experience would ultimately prove more resilient. The answer, both Picard and the Emperor suspected, would be neither and both. Because the greatest strength of consciousness, whether human or otherwise, was adaptation, learning, growing beyond what came before. The Federation would face its trials, the Emperor would face his redemption, and together they would discover whether two humanities could forge a future that honored both their pasts while transcending their limitations. The journey was far from over. Indeed, it had only just begun. Live long and prosper. More stories await.